everybody. Thanks for coming to our panel discussion today. Well, it's a small panel, but a very interesting one. So this is, as you know, the 7th annual Vermont Tech Jam, organized by 7 Days in the Vermont Technology Alliance. My name is Cathy Resmer. I'm an associate publisher at 7 Days. And I appreciate you joining us for this conversation. Before we get started, I want to just take this opportunity to thank some of our Tech Jam sponsors: Dealer.com, My Web Grocer, C2, Biotech Instruments, Champlain College, Fairpoint Communications, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, Logic Supply, Merchants Bank, the Vermont Technology Council, the state of Vermont, and the city of Burlington. We could not do this without them, and we are very grateful for their support. Please stop by their booths and say hi if you can. The Tech Jam actually is going to be done, hopefully, when we are done with this panel. The jam will close for the day. It's been a pretty long and exciting day of panels and networking and talking with exhibitors and folks. Hope you have enjoyed it. So today I have with me two representatives of associated with Vermont's universities, I should say, who can we're going to talk about some interesting research that goes on up at the universities. We have Corine Farewell, who is the director of the Office of Technology Commercialization. Right? And I'll just say, one of the reasons that I wanted to invite these two panelists to join us today is that I think there is a lot of really interesting and exciting research happening that I think most Vermonters aren't necessarily aware of in our universities. You might have gone to this event in April called Invention to Venture. It's a conference up at UVM that I know the Vermont Technology Council plays a big part in putting on. And at that event, I went this year and just was astounded by the number of innovations and companies that were spinning out of the university, and the patents awarded at the university as well. So I'm excited to have Corine here with us today. And then also Andy Cutts. Andy, what is your actual title? No title. Andy is with the Norwich University Applied Research Institutes, and cyber strategy somehow plays a role.
Well, when you work with banks and financial institutions, by the time you say Norwich University Applied Research Institutes, you've lost them. Yeah. So we thought we'd better come up with a name that they wouldn't run away from. So we use cyber strategies as a brand name when we're talking with clients in the finance sector.
Got it. And Andy's going to talk about their massive multiplayer role-playing game, which isn't really a game; it's a drill for disasters and for I think you're expanding it to include cyber attacks as well, which I just find interesting and also creepy and great. It's great that this is happening, that someone is doing this work. It's very important. So I think we're going to hear from Corine first. We're going to hear from Corine first. So take it away, Corine.
Thank you, Cathy. Hopefully I'm not creepy.
It's the hacking part that's creepy.
That's scary. Scary. So what I wanted to do today is just talk about the Office of Tech Commercialization at UVM, a little bit about why we exist and how we bring technologies forward. As Cathy mentioned, in April we do a wonderful conference where we bring faculty and students in the community together to look at what's happening. And a lot of times that's focused on companies that are coming out of UVM. But I want to take a few steps back to look at how did that all start? Where's the nidus of the inventions and where do they come from? On the slide, on the far end of the funnel, there's academic research. And that research is, for the most part, the lion's share is funded by the federal government. So in essence, that's taxpayers' money that is going into basic research at universities across the United States, of which UVM gets its fair share from as well. Out of that academic research, for the most part federally funded, some is funded as well by corporations and for-profit entities as well. But out of that, one of the conditions for accepting the federal money is to disclose if you make a new invention or discovery using that funding to disclose that discovery to your tech transfer office at that institution, and that's who we are. So once that discovery comes into our office, we look at, I jest a little bit, it's so who cares? What is this all about? What problem is this new discovery addressing? Is it solving an existing problem? Is it solving a future problem? What's the value, if you will, of the discovery for the well-being of people and or animals/plants? So we go through an assessment, and this is where I shamelessly plug that we are always looking for interns and for students, particularly college-age students, to help us with these assessments. We'll take that technology that is presented to us and go through a pretty rigid assessment of what we would call prior art. So we look if there is an existing technology out there that's very similar, already addressing this problem. Are there other patents that have already been issued around this area that may block us from pursuing a patent in this area? And basically just assess what's the value? Is there a market? Is there a product? Is it an interesting research discovery but not really a commercial product down the road? And once we go through that assessment, and many of the technologies that come into UVM, as you can well imagine, are coming from the medical college. So there are new ways of addressing disease or treating disease, or new devices, medical devices, to address different conditions. But although that is the majority of the technologies coming in, it is not the only technologies coming in. There is also a fair amount that come in from the other departments in the universities, such as chemistry, for instance. One drug, which I have to plug, that has recently come onto the market just last year, although it takes a good, in this case it was probably more than 15 years from the original discovery until there was an actual product on the market. And it's not yet FDA approved, it's approved in Europe. So it's slowly making its way to benefit for the public good. That is a discovery that is a drug called pixanthrone, and it was a joint discovery between a professor at the College of Medicine and in the chemistry department. So it was a collaboration between those two who brought this new pharmaceutical compound forward. That's the holy grail for tech transfer offices to have a compound. It's a wonderful thing. Many of our technologies are improvements on existing technologies or existing ways of treating a disease, where just incremental improvements. Well, just as easy to say, they are incremental improvements. So usually those kinds of technologies get licensed into existing companies and fold into their portfolios and may become a product that is an improvement on something existing. We don't usually hear so much about those. They don't make a big splash, but they're still very important and important to advance science and the different treatments that are available. Another area that I don't want to leave out are the physical sciences or the devices. As we go through these assessments, we assess if it's something is patentable. That means if it's novel, it's useful, and non-obvious. Those are the hurdles to acquire a patent. If they are patentable, we would generally, as a university, we would assess if there's value in that patent, and if it will lead to a commercial product. We'll invest in that patent, and then go on to either to license it to an existing company, as I spoke of with the pharmaceuticals, for instance. It's impossible, because of the amount of money and the time required to bring a compound forward, for a small company to do that on its own. It generally, at some point in its life, will get folded up into a large pharmaceutical. The other pathway is on occasion, and these were the companies that Cathy was referring to, mostly seeing at our Invention to Venture conference, are companies that the technology is kind of edgy, too new. It doesn't fit into the norm of an existing company that can be used to improve something, but it either creates an entire new platform on its own, or it is so disruptive to the status quo that the existing companies don't want to deal with it, and would probably even prefer it didn't come to light. And then, so these kinds of technologies tend to lend themselves to smaller companies, or companies that we would call UVM startups. So the existing, I brought a couple of examples. One is, this isn't the exact device. This is a prototype. That's another phase of as we develop these technologies. Some of them require that a prototype is made. So there's something to touch, to feel, to show to potential licensees or investors. One of them is one of my favorites. It's called MicroShield, and it's a protective. We've all heard about infections acquired in hospitals, and in that situation where you're more susceptible, you're physically stressed and more susceptible to acquiring an infection. This is a technology. It's very, very simple. It's one of those, why didn't they think about this sooner, or think of this earlier? That protects where the IV injections are connected to the lines that would go into the patient. It's a brilliant, simple but brilliant technology that we've created a prototype, and we're in the process of marketing and trying to find a good licensing partner.
Can I interrupt you a second?
Sure.
When you say we, who's we?
Oh, we are myself and my colleagues at the Office of Tech Commercialization.
It's not your invention, though.
It is not my invention. That's a very good point, because you know what? They're all our babies. So every invention that comes in there is truly a partnership that develops between the inventor, the researcher who has come up with the concept or new discovery that is patentable, and the tech commercialization team. They do become our babies, and we bring them forward. But that's a great point, because a sense of ownership is created even though we are not the inventors ourselves. So another way that these technologies move forward, I mentioned some of them are just a little bit either too different, a little edgy, if you will, in a good way. Or another thing is that it addresses a need, but the need is not large enough for a large company to invest in. But it's a very respectable smaller business. A good example of that is one that I'm particularly proud of, that has come out of UVM. And if you were here at the Tech Jam last year, you would have seen demonstrations of Easy, E-A-S-Y. Easy is a tactile writer and eraser for seeing impaired people. It's like a tablet and a pen that you can write and draw freehand on, and it raises so that it's tactily decipherable, if you will. And the novel discovery with that is that they also created an eraser, which you can say, oh no, not that line wasn't quite correct, and erase it. That's novel in this group. But as you can imagine, it's not the largest market, but it's an important market. And through a collaboration with the students in the senior design class in the engineering school, two of their professors, the National Foundation for the Blind, and our office, we were able to bring it forward to become a business, and they're actually selling product as of 2 months ago, which is just a wonderful thing. It'll never be a we won't be able to buy stock in it, basically. It'll never be a publicly traded business, but it is still a very important contribution. Another business that I'd like to mention is another UVM startup, which is kind of cool. It's much further along, and it has a much larger market. But again, it was a very risky early invention. It's basically, you know how if you picture a diving board, there's that vibration that's created if there's shaking or whatever. It's a piezoelectric motor. So that little shaking creates energy. This company has miniaturized that to become mini batteries, if you will, to support, for instance, in tires. You can put it in the tire, and some of the sensors in the tires that detect if you have low air or if too much air or something's going wrong in the tire, it needs energy to do that. What better place to put a little motor that is charged on vibration? You can imagine a lot of different applications for this, monitoring bridges, all sorts of structures that vibrate can use these little motors to create the energy they need to sense whatever is important to them. That company is in the starting gates, I would say. It's doing great. It's located in New York. It is a company that came out of UVM research and has moved, unfortunately, and fortunately. The resources, what they needed for technology was available in the upstate New York area, but they needed to move their labs over there to avail themselves to it. So those are a couple of examples of what our office does. Our charge really is to take those nascent technologies and bring them forward, to try to find homes, if you will, for them. And there's a lot of really cool stuff coming out of UVM. So I would encourage you to look at your calendar in April and maybe come visit, see what we have going on at the I2V conference.
Great. Yeah, and one of the most exciting things at that for me was the patent.
The
patent awards that they have at that conference as well. Very interesting.
We award our faculty inventors who have received a patent that year receive a plaque. And it's no small, it's quite an achievement to get through the whole patent process and come out the other end with something valuable.
Do people have questions for Corine? Yes.
The drug is pixanthrone. It's a treatment for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And let's hope that it makes it to the U.S. as well. But so far, so good in Europe. Does the office have a website so people can see what's happening? We do. We have, as the woman who works on our website is sitting right behind you, Beth Hill. Our website, if you go to the UVM site and search technology commercialization, it will come up, or UVM innovations, it will come up. And we have a listing there of different startup companies in the news, as well as technologies available for licensing. And we're always looking for interns. That's my shameless plug.
What do the interns do?
Well, they interject into different parts, so it depends on what their interest is. One of the nice things about tech commercialization is that we touch so many different areas where if they're purely interested in science, they can do the technical assessment on the science front. Or if they're interested more in the business, they can look at the different market opportunities, how this would fit in if they're interested in product development. So basically, we can provide a really good learning experience all along that pathway. So they do a lot.
Do they have to be UVM students?
They do not.
Good to know. Yep. Other questions?
Sure.
Once a company becomes a startup company and leaves UVM, do they still have access to your resources?
That's a great question. So, in general, what will happen if it's a startup company, often a faculty member or graduate student, somebody who has been intimately involved in the development of the technology is also involved in the company. So if it's the faculty member, they're not going to give up. Generally, they don't give up their day job to go with the company. So there's still that research that continues at the university in that vein, whatever it was. If it's a grad student who has left to work in the company, they usually keep very good connections to UVM. So these startup companies, one of the great resources that we have, and to keep the startup companies in the area, is access to the laboratories and that continued support until they get to a point where, they're, to use the analogy of babies, they're adolescents, and it's kind of time for them to move on. But.
Thank you, Corinne.
Thanks.
Here, let me just. Oop, how do I do it? Well, here we are. Wait, it went away. Sorry. There you go. Got it? Here you go.
What's that?
You can move it over to you. So you can drive. So, Andy,
Take it away.
take it away.
Well, I found that to be a very interesting discussion. Could have used a technology transfer office at Norwich University when we began this effort. It's been awarded 3 patents and is one of those edgy things, like that word, because there was nobody that was going to build this commercially. So it did require government funding, and we are on the cusp of commercializing it, and we're out talking to the venture capital world and building a brand new business and hiring people to build software for us and do other things. So for those of you with green stickers on your badges, you can come talk to me afterwards if you have any interest. So don't bother with the details on the slide, but just get the sense. May 2010, there was something called the flash crash, where the stock market went down 10% in 2 minutes, and then came back, thankfully. August 2012, from the news, a company called Knight Capital loses $440 million in a little more than 2 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, due to a trading disruption on their network. August 2013, also from the news, NASDAQ has a flash freeze, and they had to close for 3 or 4 hours due to a network or system disruption. Also in the news, 2013, 50 organizations, exchanges, investment banks scrambled to protect systems from very sophisticated cyber attacks. So of those 4 examples, which one was the exercise? Any idea? Flash crash, NASDAQ going down, Knight Capital losing $440 million, 50 organizations facing a prolonged cyber attack. It was the last one. The last one was an exercise. Thank goodness. Right. The first 3 had 2 things in common. One, none of them was an exercise, but also none of them was due to a malicious cyber attack. They were all simply system or network disruptions, malfunctions. But in this case, this was a large exercise which looked at how the markets would respond to very sophisticated cyber attacks. And it was made possible through a technology that we've developed at Norwich University Applied Research Institutes. And here is a graphic that some of the players in this exercise had to deal with. This was, if you look to, you can see some clocks at the bottom, and then you see the purple volumes. Maybe you can make out to the right-hand side of that graphic that those volumes have gone to zero between 3:30 and 3:45 in the afternoon, which would be bad news for a market. At the same time, volumes for unregulated exchanges called dark pools are going through the roof, which also probably would be a sign that there's something going wrong with the market. At the same time, a variety of organizations and their systems are having availability losses, different types. At the same time that other organizations are experiencing high latencies, and latency is a major area that banks and brokerages and exchanges look at. If something is 2 or 3 milliseconds higher than it should be, that's bad news, and it's taken care of. So, and then some other organizations dealt with suspicious transactions and so forth. All of these graphics that I'm showing you are graphics which represented problems that these financial institutions faced in this exercise. So the concept for this distributed simulation that enables many, many financial institutions to work through these kinds of disruptions came out of the Naval War College. And some of you may have heard of a guy by the name of Admiral Nimitz. Admiral Nimitz was responsible for U.S. Navy operations in the Pacific during World War II. Well, when Admiral Nimitz was not an admiral, when he was a commander in the 1920s, 20 years before World War II, he spent 2 years at the War College, and he and a guy by the name of Bull Halsey and some others wargamed everything that happened ultimately in the Pacific campaign with the Japanese. They wargamed it so many times on their parquet floor at the War College in so many ways that they eventually anticipated everything that the Japanese did except kamikazes. They didn't anticipate that. But in order to anticipate all those kinds of things, they had to run those war games many, many times against a team called the Red Team, which played the adversary. And the reason why this concept was very useful for us in developing DECIDE is that in the 1920s, carrier warfare didn't exist. There were no aircraft carriers, and yet aircraft carriers were absolutely instrumental to what happened in World War II. So you got to ask yourself the question, how did they learn to do aircraft carrier warfare if there were no aircraft carriers? Well, they did it on the parquet floor at the War College, right? So they were able to think it through. Well, if you just kind of make the mental analogy and you say, okay, well, here they had to think through aircraft carrier warfare 20 years before aircraft carriers were out in warfare. How would we deal with sophisticated cyber weapons that we've never seen? How would we deal with those? Well, we have an example. Put together a parquet floor that allows us to look at cyber attacks that we've never seen before and figure out how to anticipate what those might look like. So the task that we took on for ourselves at Norwich University was to build a parquet floor for the 21st century, a parquet floor that would allow people to think through cyber attacks. It was very, very simple. Except you can't build a parquet floor in cyberspace, right? Because there's no parquet tiles. So you build it out of simulation networks and those kinds of things. So in our parquet floor, we have the ability to create a variety of attacks, and this is just what the user interface would look like for the guy who develops the scenario in the background, and this is what the user interface would look like for the players who are taking actions. They're not moving aircraft carriers around the parquet floor, but they're taking actions in a web interface to respond to sophisticated cyber attacks. And the simulation allows us to create scenarios that players have to react to. We can We can disrupt all kinds of systems, and we can introduce integrity loss into transactions, and we can introduce latencies, and we can mess with market value prices and stock prices and introduce suspicious trades and all kinds of things in this simulated environment. None of which, of course, affect anything in the real world because it's a completely simulated environment. And so that's exactly how you'd want it. If you want to look through a scenario, you certainly don't want to take any chance that you're dealing with real-world networks. So this DECIDE technology is a complete simulation of the U.S. equities market and all the players in that market, and we can disrupt it in many ways. And the goal is to deliver the ability to run through very sophisticated scenarios to the desktops of financial institutions. So your brokerage or your exchange or any of your other financial institutions can sit there at their desktop during lunch hour and I want to think through this scenario or I want to think through that scenario. So that's the basic concept here. Questions?
I have a question. Sorry, go ahead.
You know, it's a good question. Right, so it's actually a very good question. I'm going to take it at face value, and I'm going to tell you the answer. The reason we didn't come up with this idea ourselves, but we had a call from a financial manager in 2005, asked us to build this simulation. And the scenario that happened at the time was President Reagan passed away. Real world event. Passed away on Saturday. His state funeral was the next Friday. And the government was going to close, and the financial markets were going to close for the state funeral on Friday. And they had 5 days to plan to close the markets between Saturday and Friday. So everybody closes on Friday except a major financial institution decides not to. It has to go against the grain. And that caused tremendous financial risk for everybody else in the market. So this risk manager at a large bank calls me up shortly after and he says, "You wouldn't believe what happened. We had 5 days to plan this." He says, we spend tens of millions of dollars every year to plan how to deal with financial risk. And that's the risk you were talking about, is the risk that we saw recently with the shutdown of the government and so on and so forth. But we don't know how to deal with operational risk when networks are disrupted or systems are taken offline. Build us a simulation to do that. So the answer to your question is the simulation is designed to simulate disruptions to systems, back office networks, but it's not designed to help with the front office financials of how markets are going to do under a certain condition. Does that answer your question?
I have a question. One of the things I was interested to read, I think I read it in an article that Ken Picard might have written about this software, that you did drills before Hurricane Sandy, for example. Simulating this with a variety of different partners.
Let's see. So we actually did a large exercise with the finance sector in 2011. And some of the things that I've showed you in these news snippets, we actually looked at before they happened in the real world. But Sandy was not one of them.
No.
In fact, in a large exercise that we did this last year, in July, we looked at a problem very similar to what happened with NASDAQ in August. So we anticipated that one and looked at that in a simulation. So we can look at things. We've done it twice now, 2 different exercises. We've actually looked at things in scenarios and exercises that had not yet happened in the real world, but happened shortly thereafter. Mm. So, and that's the whole concept, is to allow people to think through things that they've never seen before.
Is anyone else curious about how this works? So if I'm at a financial institution, am I like at my computer at the same time as other people at other financial institutions or other governmental agencies?
Yes, you are. So what happens is that there's a single simulated market that's running on a server someplace. And if you're at an organization, Bank X, and I'm at another organization, Brokerage Y, and we both log into that same simulation at the same time through a user interface or through a web interface, then whatever disruptions happen on that server to that simulated market, well, we're going to experience at the same time. But Cheryl, you're going to experience the effects differently at Bank X than I would at Brokerage Y because you have a different business model than I do. And the simulation takes that into account. If you're an exchange or you're a clearing corporation or you're a brokerage, everything that you see through your web interface is going to be unique to you and unique to your business model. And so you're going to be taking response actions that are particularly valuable for you to take. And I'm going to be taking a completely different set of response actions which are valuable for me to take. And then when you put that all together, you get an awful lot of complexity because players not only have to respond to the initial problems, but then they have to respond to all the uncoordinated responses that everybody else is taking, and that's what happens in a real-world event. And so it gets very complex very quickly, and that's how the real world is.
Are you like, do they have headsets and they're like when they're playing Halo?
Yes,
They're talking?
yes, they have headsets and talking to. So it's all very fun. That's all we do is just have fun. It's the government paid us to do. Just joking.
So you're simulating what happens? Is there an aspect that says, if this happens, then we can have something code-wise automatically fix that issue? Somebody blows $1 billion sale of stock they shouldn't have, and the market goes down the toilet because of it. It counteracts that? Or is it just this could happen, so look for it, and if you see it, then do this?
So that's another excellent question. When this financial manager called us in 2004 and said, can you build us this simulation that we're asking for? What we had to work with was a complete blank sheet of paper. Nothing like this had ever existed other than the parquet floor at the War College. And we had two options. Option A was to create a black box model that would be predictive in its outcome. And you know what a black box model is. Data comes in, you have some algorithms in your black box model, and then data goes out. And there are a number of very predictive models and algorithms out there, and people in the financial markets create these all the time. They try to predict which way a stock's going to go under certain conditions, right? So we could have attempted to create a simulation of the stock market that would lead to predictive outcomes. But we thought that's absolutely foolish for a couple reasons. One, it's a very complex market. By the time you simulated it, all your data would be outdated. And so it's very dynamic. And two, nobody would trust the outcomes, black box model, right? So the other option was to do something completely novel, which is why we turned to the War College example. So this is not a predictive model. This is a player in the loop war game environment where nothing happens unless players actually take action from their keyboards. And the actions that players take are absolutely critical to the outcomes. If I want to take an action, I can do that. The action should be realistic for me, and then I can see how that might result in feedback. You know, there are feedback loops in the simulation. But it's player in the loop rather than predictive. Does that help you or get close to where you're going at?
So I was thinking more along the lines of, if one of these things happen, does somebody have to be looking at it and see this big huge spike? It's going to cause the market to tank, or somebody sells off 100 million shares of IBM.
Yeah.
IBM stock drops 50% because, oh my God, something bad's happening. Oh, somebody screwed up over here. If
Yeah.
somebody catches that and says, don't tank the market on that, clearly something went wrong.
Yeah.
Shouldn't happen.
Yeah, so if you can run whatever simulation, whatever scenario you want. There are literally millions of scenarios, potential scenarios in the tool. You pick a scenario and you run it and something happens, just like you're saying, and then whatever the event is. And then something in the user interface has to indicate to the player that an event has happened, because if there's no indication, the player's just going to let it go and not respond to it. So there have to be useful indicators to players, meaningful indicators. And so some of those are here, right? So here's an indicator. Volume drops at 3:45. That's an indicator that players would use if they're at exchanges to do something. Here's another indicator. Clearly, there's an indicator that something's happening with dark pools, and then players can take independent actions about that. And you can think of a player as a regulator or Department of Treasury or a bank or an exchange or whatever, or the dark pools themselves. Here's another example where certain firms are experiencing latency. So they would see this indicator that there's latencies all of a sudden around 3:45 p.m. They can get a sense for how those latencies, how big those latencies are compared to their normal operations, and they can figure out what they're going to do about it. But yeah, a player has to see some indicator of a problem before they can take actions.
You just got this $1 million contract, correct? What is next for Ivory and for this software?
Right. So going back to what Corine was saying earlier, when you have something that's pretty revolutionary like this, you first have to start with a prototype and prove that you can do it. So the version that I just showed you is, in fact, the beta version. It's a prototype, and we had to prove with the government's money that we could build something like this and that it would be useful. So now that we've proven that, the government is willing to give us the next round of money to build out the next version of this technology. So in the first version, we have simulated the U.S. equities market or the stock market, but now we need to add a lot more detail to that market so we can allow financial institutions to look at a whole new range of scenarios that they cannot look at currently, and well as add additional markets, so commodities markets and options markets, and then add additional sectors. So the way the government thinks about this, and the wide reason why the government would spend money on this, is because the government is responsible at some level for protecting what it calls critical infrastructure. So critical infrastructure in this case includes financial institutions and the markets, and it includes transportation, and it includes the electrical grid, major critical infrastructure. And once we've proved the concept here in the finance sector, the next step would be to model some additional critical infrastructure. So that's what that money will help to go to. So there are, thousands of financial institutions that will benefit immediately by having access to this tool and being able to run cyber exercises they could never run before, again, from their desktop. So extremely cost effective and so forth.
Other questions for either of these folks? No, I guess not.
Thanks.
Andy and Corine, thank you so much for joining us today at the Tech Jam and sharing this with us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you all for coming to the Tech Jam today, and I hope that you will, I guess if you've already been today, but you might not want to come back tomorrow, but you could. You could come back tomorrow. The Tech Jam will be going from 10 to 3 tomorrow here at Memorial. We'll kick off with a story hack, 24-hour storytelling competition at 10 a.m. And that's going to start from here in this room. We've got a bunch of other stuff going on, including Bina 48, the world's most social robot, who will be here tomorrow at the Tech Jam. So come back and join us, and thanks very much.